So China is struggling and the larger business environment is not helping. It's tough to operate in. Business leaders across the world are tightening their belts. This year began with mass layoffs. We are halfway through it and the layoffs are not ending. Earlier it was the technology players. Now banks and advisory firms have joined the layoff wave. Goldman Sachs is firing its top officials. It will ask 125 managing directors to leave, 125 MDs. This is across departments, offices and countries. So why is Goldman Sachs firing senior talent? Because they're unable to generate new business. Reports say the company has faced a deal slump, so 125 managing directors have been asked to go. What's the overall situation like? Well, bad, to put it mildly. In less than a year, Goldman Sachs has ordered 3 rounds of layoffs. Last year, some positions were eliminated. In January this year, more than 3,000 people were laid off, and now managing directors are facing the axe. Then we have advisory firm KPMG. It's on the same boat. KPMG has seen, or rather is seeing, its second round of layoffs. More than 1,900 people are being let go of in the US offices. 4 months back, they laid off some 700 employees. Third on the list is brokerage firm Robinhood. They too are slashing jobs. 7% of their full-time staff is set to leave, 7%. What about India? How are Indian companies faring? Well, not spectacularly, I'm afraid. They too have been hit by this layoff wave. Indian companies are slashing jobs just like the rest of the world, and the IT sector is the worst affected. So far in this financial year, almost 5,000 people have lost their jobs. More than half of these jobs were based in Bengaluru. It's the IT hub of India, and Bengaluru has seen a sharp dip in hiring too. In fact, this month, there was a 7% dip in hiring. So basically, companies are hiring fewer people and firing many. And by all indications, this trend is here to stay for a while. So companies are also moving into smaller offices. They're leaving bigger spaces. And the result is this: a record number of offices are now empty. In the US, office vacancies have touched the 20% mark, meaning 1 in 5 offices is vacant. In cities like San Francisco, Dallas and Houston, vacancy rates are as high as 25%. In London, about 14% of the city's floor space is empty, 14%. In Hong Kong, about 13 million square feet of office space is vacant. These numbers could get bigger. More companies want to shrink their office spaces. Earlier this month, a global survey came out. 347 top companies were part of the survey. Half of them want smaller offices now. 2 reasons why. Number 1, fewer employees are coming to office. Many are still working from home. And number 2, companies have a reduced headcount. Many people have been fired, so they don't really need big offices. Now, this has led to a new problem: bank defaults. Landlords are unable to pay their debts. Defaults in commercial real estate is on the rise. Leading property giants have defaulted, like RXR, Columbia Property Trust, and Brookfield Asset Management. And what's the value of their debt? Well, I don't have a number, but experts say it runs into billions of dollars. One of the developers I mentioned is RXR. Earlier this year, its chief executive spoke out. He said they're unable to lease some of their properties, so they're resorting to some extreme measures. In fact, let me quote from what the CEO said back in the month of February. With some of those, I don't think there's anything we can do with them. Give the keys back to the bank, and you've got to be disciplined about it. And that's what they did. Handed the property over to the bank. Last month, they gave up a 33-story office building in Manhattan. The loan on this property was worth $240 million. So RXR decided to default. And this points to a larger trend. The global economy is in a slump. Now, we've seen a slowdown before, but this one's different. It comes after a life-altering pandemic. It may change our jobs and our offices irreversibly. For our last story tonight, let me talk about our planet, the Earth. Apparently, we humans are tilting it. We're tilting the Earth. When we picture it, we imagine a perfect sphere, but that's not the case. Our planet looks more like a lumpy potato. And this is a potato that's constantly spinning at the top. But what happens when you move enough mass from one place to another? The planet wobbles, which is what's happening. Our Earth's axis has shifted because humans can't get enough of groundwater. Our next report explains.
We humans love our groundwater. Let me explain. Groundwater makes up 99% of Earth's liquid fresh water. It provides drinking water, helps irrigate crops, and even replenishes surface water. All in all, it's important for us. And we love it so much that we are sucking it dry, pumping it out from natural underground reservoirs. Between 1993 and 2010, we have removed 2,150 gigatons of groundwater. Simply put, that's a lot of water. Enough to fill 860 million Olympic swimming pools. And to say that this has impacted the planet would be an understatement. It has, in fact, shifted the Earth's tilt. We'll tell you how. As you know, our planet is constantly spinning like a top. While being covered by water bodies and land masses, this mass is important to maintain the balance of Earth. Now, if you distribute mass unevenly, the planet will wobble as it spins. That's exactly what's happening here. Humans have rampantly removed groundwater from the Earth, and this has changed its distribution. The Earth is spinning on an axis or an imaginary line around which it rotates. Now, because of the uneven water distribution for over a decade, this axis has shifted, and it is tipping over to the east at a rate of about 1.7 inches per year. Only half of the groundwater makes it back to the reservoirs. The rest eventually travels to the oceans, through rivers and other channels. From 1993 to 2010, groundwater pumping caused the global sea level to rise by 0.24 inches. So is this a cause for worry? Well, just the axis shift, not so much. It is not enough to cause any major seasonal change, but that isn't the whole problem. The issue occurs due to rise in sea levels. Seas are predicted to rise a foot by 2050. The oceans rose more than twice as fast in the past decade than it did between 1993 and 2002. Last year was a new high, and it is no coincidence that the past 8 years were the warmest on record. After all, sea level rise is one of the most severe consequences of climate change. And the speed at which this is happening is only accelerating. And you know what this means? In the coming years, millions of people are going to be displaced. Whole cities face the threat of sinking. With Lagos, Bangkok, Mumbai, Shanghai, London, Buenos Aires and New York topping the list. And there will be more storms and flooding.
Water is a human right and a common development denominator to shape a better future. But water is in deep trouble. We are draining humanity's lifeblood through vampiric overconsumption and unsustainable use, and evaporating it through global heating. We've broken the water cycle, destroyed ecosystems, and contaminated groundwater.
We all know it. We all feel it. Now it's the time to rise above our partial and sectional interests, see the big picture, and get moving.
We need to invest in water infrastructure, including water storage, treatment, and distribution systems. Water management systems need to be built based on our needs, appropriate for our small scale and low population numbers, and appropriate to avoid damage to our ocean ecosystems.
So while the Earth shifting its tilt sounds fascinating and only mildly scary, climate change is real and happening. And you can't ignore that sinking feeling. So it's time to focus on the big picture.
Our next story is about cricket. Excitement is in the air. India is set to host the World Cup. The schedule has been released and the big headliner is the India-Pakistan match. It will be held in the Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad. The first time in 7 years that India will be hosting Pakistan. And if social media is to be believed, it's not something that Pakistan is looking forward to. Regardless, one can expect all eyes glued to TV screens on the 15th of October when India and Pakistan clashed on the field. Now, to give you an idea, in 2019, the India-Pakistan World Cup match drew 273 million viewers. But you see, this is merely a mega clash in terms of optics. On the field, India is far superior than its neighbour. After all, Pakistani cricket has a long list of problems, including a complacent board, coaching concerns and feuds between players. But optics or not, cricket for this subcontinent is more than a sport. It's also an overwhelming emotion, and often a story of sheer grit or rags to riches. But we're not talking about India and Pakistan tonight. We're talking about Britain, the birthplace of cricket. In the early 18th century, it was a sport created for rich white landowners, codified to allow them to bet against each other and exported around the world, usually at gunpoint, with the promise of civilizing so-called savage people. So surprise, surprise, that English cricket is no great equalizer. It's still not as progressive as many would like to believe. And England seems to have woken up to this fact, finally, thanks to a painfully frank wake-up call, a line in the sand, a humiliation. I'm talking about a report released by the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket. It's a damning critique of British cricket, one of the most devastating ones so far. It draws on evidence from more than 4,000 sources, from players, coaches, administrators and fans. It looks into discrimination in the English game, and based on the survey, the report has documented inbuilt prejudice, laying bare the game's failings. It talks about a smorgasbord of problems, which are not limited to a few bad apples, not confined to pockets, but all pervasive. This report says racism is entrenched in cricket. It affects 87% respondents of Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage, 82% people of Indian heritage and 75% of black respondents. And this discrimination affects the power structure within the game, where white male captains, coaches, chief executives and board chairs hold all the power. Let me give you some examples. South Asians make up 28% of the game's recreational pool, but only 2.8% of the sport's executive level positions. And that's not all. The report also says that English cricket is deeply sexist and elitist. In 2021, 58% of England male cricketers were privately educated, compared to 7% in the population at large. And these facts are incriminating, but they aren't new or hidden from plain sight. For years, critics have pointed them out. So why don't we see a change? For starters, the complaint system is confusing and defensive. So most victims suffer in silence. Also because these problems are not limited to cricket. They're rooted in our social fabric across the world. And we are no woke crusaders. But when a sport that should be a uniting force is cultivating an unsafe environment for thousands, it may be time to hold a mirror to that sport. Because the time for squeamishness is past. And if a diagnosis can be the first step of the treatment, this sport of cricket may just get its long-awaited level playing field. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Thousands marched in North Korea's anti-US rally to mark the anniversary of the Korean War. A massive blaze engulfed a residential tower in the United Arab Emirates. A Japanese university has designed wearable robotic arms to explore the idea of a multi-limbed cyborg society. And finally, going back in history, on the 27th of June 2008, India's former army chief Sam Manekshaw died. He's considered one of the country's greatest war heroes. He played a crucial role during India's victory over Pakistan in 1971 in the creation of Bangladesh. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
이 참가자들은 역적이 코를 치며 행진에 나갔습니다. 최악의 총본살인 미국이라는 땅.
モードみたいなのしかできない。こんな感じ。